the Constitution, the letter and spirit. They also seek to lower the bar on accountability. It's a sort of an insider trading, a sweetheart deal, where partners in government, because this so-called broad-based government is as broad as KK and ODM, because that's where it stops. It's the KK coalition and a new found whatever ODM. And I am saying, without entering into a formal coalition, this is a come-we-stay marriage, which is not allowed by the law. So to begin with, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, and it will lead to unconstitutionality in the conduct of the business of parliament, where a party in government continues to chair watchdog committees, namely public accounts and public investment committees. There are numerous of each of those committees.
So what do you think changed? Because Martha, you were Raila Odinga's running mate less than 2 years ago. Presumably you had shared values and shared ideals. So what do you make of this about turn with him, and you know, for somebody that you were willing to run a government with not too long ago?
I think only him can explain his change of heart, especially because he's one person who worked hard to get the 2010 Constitution. The journey for getting this Constitution, we have worked together in Parliament as opposition. At one time, he stood with the government when he joined President Moi. We remained in the opposition. So we have worked together, but there are times when we have not walked exactly the same path. It's only him who can explain why at this time he will allow himself and his party to lower the bar on accountability. It is not illegal or unconstitutional to enter government, but through the front door, not through the back door, by forming a coalition. And the law allows a post-election coalition. But to have one leg in government, one leg in the opposition, that's basically blocking and watering down the accountability, the checks and balances that are given by the Constitution. And I would urge him and his party to reconsider these issues.
How do you feel about his decision and his move and his recent statements?
Obviously disappointed, and as you saw, NARC Kenya gave notice to withdraw from Azimio. The notice matures in 3 months, but in the meantime we will not participate in anything to do with Azimio. We do not want to be party to having one leg this side, one leg the other. We do not want to support what we believe is untenable. But our discontent started earlier than this move. If you remember, in December, NARC Kenya rejected wholly the NADCO report, while some of our partners in Azimio accepted it as a good step. So from that time, we have really been sort of estranged. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back.
So, you know, like you said, this was something because we had seen you stopped attending meetings, even, you know, as early as last year. You rejected the NADCO report. So where do you stand now? What is your political philosophy at this point, Martha? We've seen you talk about Kamwene at one point. You attended Limuru 3 meeting. You've disowned the NADCO report. It would seem...
Organized and attended.
Sorry? Sorry, say that again?
Organized and attended.
You organized and attended that, yes.
Not only attended.
Right, and organized. It would seem, you know, in 2 short years, a lot has happened, even with you and NARC Kenya's position. What would you term as your political philosophy right now? And where does that fall in the current circumstances we have in the country?
My philosophy has not changed. I'm out of government, therefore opposition. And I'm opposition, and NARC Kenya is opposition outside the coalition, and we were still opposition inside the coalition. The position does not change at all, and it is not a must that we be part of any coalition. No party is formed to look for a coalition. a party is formed to seek power. In January, when we had not left Azimio yet, we had agreed that each party goes and strengthens itself so that the strength of each party becomes the strength of Azimio. Right now, we are on that journey of strengthening ourselves alone, and now that we've pulled out of the coalition, we'll continue to do so. We have friends in the opposition. If we feel that there are issues we can stand together, we would not hesitate, but we do not need to be together in order to raise issues. Even in the period 2017-2022, NARC Kenya stood alone and was able to do a lot. We were a voice opposing the Constitution, with not the Constitution, but opposing BBI within Linda Katiba. We were a voice when the coronavirus came because, again, opposition had been muted due to the friendship between Raila and Uhuru Kenyatta. So we have occupied our space even as a party, punching more than we are considered, what is considered to be our weight.
Okay, I'd like to speak a little bit about that because you've talked about a party wanting to, of course, seek power, and you'll continue to play the role of the opposition. But Martha, it would seem you're charting somewhat of a lonely path right now when we see other members of the Azimio coalition who disagree with a broad-based government seem to be coalescing around Kalonzo Musyoka from the Wiper Party. You are alone. How do you propose to be able to play the role of the opposition, Martha, when NARC Kenya has no members in the National Assembly, no members at the Senate? Perhaps you can tell us about how many members of County Assembly you have. How do you feel you will play the role of the opposition or the minority or holding the government to account with no numbers in Parliament?
May I remind you, Yvonne, that even between 2017 and 2022, we had no member of Parliament. We only had MCAs. Our voice was louder than those numbers. Even now, when I was within the coalition, that did not give me members of Parliament. NARC Kenya still had no members of Parliament. Our voice, even in those Azimio activities, was louder than our numbers. And by the way, we have 18 MCAs. And we are content with that for now, and we will continue growing the party. The stand people take, the weight of their voice can sometimes be beyond the numbers. When you subvert democracy and the Constitution in spite of your numbers, as is being done by both KK and their new partners, ODM, the numbers don't commend themselves for anything. That's why we have parties with such huge numbers in that parliament. They cannot save the people from the problems they are having. Those numbers did not help us in the vetting that has just taken place. They have not helped this regime that is tone deaf and cannot hear the cries of the people and ignored people completely as relates to the Finance Act 2024 and even 2023, which has just been turned down by the court. So it's not numbers that will matter out here. It is the voice of the people. And finally, even in the period, in the runner-up to the 2022 elections, NARC Kenya was a standalone. Others had first gone on to spearhead BBI. When we came back together as Azimio, we were still able to find our space and won the slot of being running mate. I don't feel threatened, and NARC Kenya does not feel threatened. We are on a journey. Watch this space. About Kamwene and Limuru 3, it is not wrong to organize around communities, so long as that organization is not intended to hurt the rights of others. The issues we were raising in Mount Kenya, which were about the very same finance bill 2024, which was later to be withdrawn, were issues affecting the rest of Kenya. But Mount Kenya seemed to be under psychological lock and even physical lock because during the Azimio demonstrations, we were completely barred from penetrating Mount Kenya. After the Limuru 3, I can say that that cloud hanging over Mount Kenya psychologically seems to have lifted, and you have seen Mount Kenya largely supporting or standing with the rest of Kenyans to resist oppression. It's a good day to see Kenyans united to resist oppression.
Martha, that statement around coalescing around communities, some would say would sound rather similar to what the Deputy President has been saying. He's expressed similar sentiments around, you know, looking at what's happening within a particular community. Are you speaking the same language as Deputy President Gachagua?
I don't think so. I do not think so at all. And all politics is local. Whether it is Ruto, whether it is Raila, everybody starts at their base. And it cannot only be wrong when Mount Kenya tries, people of Mount Kenya try to stand around their base.
So how would you
lead a national party.
How would you,
being in Kamwene or in Limuru 3 organization did not stop me for standing up for Kenya.
All right. I want to understand where you feel the point of difference is between, you know, your philosophy around Kamwene and Limuru 3 and looking at Mount Kenya. Where do you think the point of difference is between your philosophy on that and the Deputy President?
I do not know what his philosophy is. All I know is that for the longest, he has been responsible for divide and rule. You remember it's the KK government that organized and actually attacked the Kenyatta farm. You remember it is the KK government that have days on end been insulting, berating other leaders from the mountain. I don't think you've ever had me standing to berate leaders from any place continuously. Criticizing their work, yes. We will say the KK government is not working. We will cite Ruto because he's the head of that regime. But you cannot tell me that we have similar philosophy. I will refuse 100%.
All right, I'd like us to stay with the Deputy President for a moment because there's matters of national interest surrounding him at the moment. Martha, there are reports of a possible plot to impeach the Deputy President. Do you think from what you've heard and what we've seen around the reports on this that there are grounds, significant grounds for his impeachment, or is this a political witch hunt? What are your thoughts?
I refuse to be drawn into issues that are purely diversionary. I see this as a Kenya Kwanza ploy to take people away from the demands of accountability by the Gen Z. I would expect that we would be discussing as a nation whether the demands of the Gen Z are rooted in the Constitution. I would expect that the Ruto regime would be telling us whether any of those demands is not rooted in the Constitution, but sending us helter-skelter, discussing petty plans within their administration. These are diversionary tactics. We must refuse as Kenyans. We must stay glued to the issues, to the fact that we have been lied to, that the Finance Act was withdrawn, yet the petrol levy has gone up with 7 shillings. That we have been lied to, that the offices of the First Lady, Second Lady, and Third Lady, if we could call the spouse to the CS for Foreign Affairs, Third Lady, we have been told their offices were to be abolished. We have seen they have been reinstated. We were told that the advisors were going to be scrapped. We are seeing everybody in place. In other words, Dr. William Ruto lied to Kenyans or gave them falsehoods when withdrawing the Finance Act. Everything is back to place, and obviously with the comfort of his newfound partnership with the ODM, it's more of the same that we are seeing. These are the issues we must not be diverted to. Infighting within the KK administration is purely their business.
Okay, I'd like to just finish up on that a little bit with following up on this. Is there something, Martha, you think about presidents and their deputies and the relationship therein that just seems to not be working, whether it is pre-2010 with the Constitution and even now? I mean, we saw that, after the 2013 election, and it would seem that that would be the same now. I know you call that diversionary tactics, but there seems to be a challenge because, Martha, even you are not with the person for whom you were a running mate less than 2 years ago. Is it a matter of shared values? Or is it just for the purposes of going through an election? You are currently not seeing eye to eye with the person with whom you were running mate less than 2 years ago. Now we're seeing, friction between the president and his deputy. What seems to be the relationship there? Is it just about winning an election and then seeing what happens afterwards? In your case, perhaps things, plans fell through after you didn't win the election. For others, you win the election and that's the end of the relationship.
I don't think it's something that has been there forever. President Kibaki and Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka had a very good relationship. So were the other deputies of President Kibaki, the late Kijana Wamalwa and Ankumudi. They had very good, cordial relationship. So this is a newfound thing that we are seeing. And once you run on one ticket, you must be able to work together, and it becomes completely untenable. You remember I was telling Uhuru and Ruto that they should both resign. They campaigned together. So perhaps Ruto and Gachagua should heed the call of the Gen Z. After all, mandate has been withdrawn from both of them directly by the people. Let them exit, give the country an occasion to go to elections and get other leaders. Yes, we have differed on principle with Raila Odinga, but there is no animosity between us.
Okay,
we remain friends, as one would say it, but we differ on principle.
Okay, how
and
is
even if we were in government, and this is something we both knew, that a day could come when we differ on principle, we would be able to discuss it, and that's what I used to say during the campaign. You discuss it in-house. But you see now, Raila sort of withdrew to campaign for the AU seat, for which he needs government backing. He has to be proposed by the government of Kenya. And I think this is where the trap fell. And you can see the timing of entering government is submission of his formal application. I think even within government, even if we had gone in together and something that is totally contrary to one's beliefs happen, it is possible to say enough is enough. I resigned from Kibaki's government. I didn't have to call him names. I just went back to the backbencher and enjoyed myself as a backbencher with less money, without power and privilege, but a happy backbencher. What we must understand as leaders, leadership is not a title deed, which you acquire and you wave at people saying this is for 5 years. It can be recalled by the people who bestow that privilege upon you. Also, events can make you exit earlier. People must get used to a vocabulary called resignation.
Let me ask, Martha.
This was in the developed democracies. The government of Ruto entire, they would have resigned without waiting for the Gen Z to be killed on the streets.
Okay, just a quick one. You say you differ on principle, but in the course of this conversation, you've talked about a point when democracy in the country was muted by the relationship between Raila and Uhuru. In 2007, you were both on different sides of the political divide.
Opposite sides.
Yes. Less than 2 years ago, you were now together. How would it be that somebody you have differed with in the past and then come together again, and less than 2 years later, you know, again, you are differing on principle, because principle, Martha, is a strong statement. It would be something that you would have seen shared ideals and shared values and principles. And some would question, you know, the political nature of this country. Somebody you have talked about in the past have said is muted democracy. Then you were with him in 2022. Here we are less than 2 years later. You are differing on principle. And it would seem that it's not just now. It was, you know, as early as last year. So is it that, you know, political formations are based on convenience at the time and not really a matter of principle? Because surely you are the same person, I would imagine you've been all these years, and Raila has been the same person. So how is it that, you know, the positions have differed so often, especially around elections?
Let's say this. We were on opposite sides in 2007. I voted for Kibaki and was his agent. You remember, I led also his side of the talks, the PNU side of the talks. But after that, we settled in government and we worked well with everyone, including Raila, who then became my boss as the Prime Minister. So we've never failed to have a working relationship. But there was that short spell of the election chaos where we completely differed. We both say we hold dear the same ideals. And even when we came together, I think we know each other well enough. And I am sure even when he chose me his running mate, he knew that there are some things that I would not agree with. We came together on a joint manifesto. And that manifesto spoke to me. Most of it had been done before I went into the coalition. But it spoke to me like it was an ARC Kenya manifesto. Those are the ideals we held dear. But you can never know what somebody will do tomorrow. And if somebody does something you totally disagree with, you then agree to disagree. Then that happens whether in business, whether in politics, whether in life. And that's why even families separate. It's the nature of human life. But you must be able to agree that the point we have reached, it is better to agree to disagree. And that's what Kenya's withdrawal is about.
Okay.
And there are some things even today, perhaps, we may see eye to eye on. That is basically what it is.
All right. I want you to stay with me, Martha. Let's take a break briefly. And when we come back, we have much to talk about with you. We want to talk about what happens next. The protests, the young people. Did the president really hear them when he said that? You know, he says now everything is solved. There's a broad-based government. There's reports of a planned protest on Thursday. And I also want to hear your thoughts on some of the laws that have been declared null and void by Parliament. When we come back, our conversation with Mida continues. I'd like us to shift our conversation to the frequent court battles, or, you know, what we've seen between the courts and Parliament. There have been a couple of laws that have been passed, you know, since 2022 that have been declared unconstitutional, null and void. Some saying it's an indictment on Parliament, the 3 Shift laws, the Finance Act 2023, as well as, you know, other judgments from the court talking about upholding the supreme law of the land. You know, you're a lawyer and an accomplished one at that, was once a justice minister in this country. What's your take on what's been happening at the courts with respect to laws passed in Parliament?
The courts are right. Public participation should not be taken lightly. It stems from the sovereignty of the people in Article 1, where it is clear that people can exercise their power through their elected representatives and also directly, and they can do so simultaneously. So when people are engaged in public participation, they're exercising their right to direct how they should be governed, how their affairs should be run. And when Parliament ignores the voice of the people, when the executive ignores the voice of the people, they are actually violating the Constitution. And we have seen public participation very hurried. We have seen it being, just given a few days. We've seen people committees going for public participation where only a select few are invited and they are sort of stage managed. This is a wake-up call for Parliament and for Wetangula as the Speaker. It's under your watch that the court is rejecting almost everything that Parliament does. That will be your legacy. Why not conduct public participation following the letter and spirit of the Constitution? Even for the executive, this is a wake-up call. You cannot bulldoze things. Kenyans have a voice. You cannot shut them up or ignore their agency. Listen to them. Stop being tone deaf.
Do you think Parliament is listening to the people? Do you still think that the representatives still have the faith of the people that elected them to be there?
Not at all. If you look at the so-called vetting, the circus that was the vetting, that will tell you nothing has changed. And I want to say here and now that 35 counties coming out to demonstrate in the large numbers we saw, this is a direct recall by the people of two institutions, namely the executive and Parliament. They should pack and leave. And people don't have to wait for was that Bangladesh?
So
listen to the people and go when there is time.
All right. So what are you saying tonight, Martha?
We saw people exercising their power directly in Bangladesh. I don't know any other constitution other than the Kenyan constitution in this world that gives the people the power to exercise their right directly, literally, the power for a people revolution.
And so
that's the interpretation of Article 1.
And so there's the Nane Nane protests that are coming up. Now there's, people saying enough, they have gotten what they wanted. At least we are hearing that from the Kenya Kwanza government, that the president listened. But people still want to go out on the streets and protest, at least by what we're seeing online. So what's the way forward? Because you've just said the people should exercise their rights directly. So are you in support of the protest this coming Thursday? And what do you think should happen? Completely. Unequivocally, I do support the protest. It's their right. And I want to say that I've observed the Kenya Kwanza administration and they have total contempt for the people. I already said that President Ruto lied to us, withdrawing the finance bill and continuing to implement things that were contained in it. Telling us he has stepped down certain offices, we see them acting. Recycling the same people he dismissed and many, many other things. I have heard the acting IG talking about acknowledging the constitutional right to demonstrate and to picket. It is the first time I hear the police citing this, and I say very well, big up for that. But do remember, unnecessary use of force is also restricted by the very same constitution. Do remember, police sitting idle while goons invade peaceful protests to give an excuse to visit, murder, and injuries on the people is a criminal offense. In fact, there is an orderly room proceedings for the police called a criminal offense. In fact, there is an orderly room proceedings for the police called being idle while on duty. Because if you're just sitting idle to see people unleash mayhem on others, like what we have. So I'm urging the police to remember their oath of office and to conduct themselves in accordance with the Constitution. Let the protests be peaceful. Let Kenyans exercise their sovereign right. And they have demonstrated that they are doing it peacefully.
until goons invade. And we are now seeing uniform rungus all over the country, prompting me to wonder which factory the KK regime has found for these rungus, which are being donned by people who claim to be businessmen guarding their premises. From Eldoret to Nandi to Nairobi to Mombasa, we've seen the same rungus, to Kisii. What is happening? Is the KK regime encouraging thuggery?
Are you saying that those that we have seen who call themselves businessmen carrying rungus are sponsored by the Kenya Kwanza administration?
It would appear so. And we have reason to believe that.
And so what happens? What are alternatives?
They have emerged in the wake of the demonstrations, and they have emerged when the KK regime appears to have deployed them to give an excuse to the murder and mayhem visited upon demonstrators on the 25th of June. That's the effective date when we have started seeing this type of behavior. We have seen abductions. We have seen arbitrary arrests. We have seen all manner of unconstitutional behavior, even with law enforcement agencies. Police in civilian going to demonstrations and shooting people, shooting to death, not to disable. So we have reason enough to believe that these goons or people calling themselves businessmen, but I would say the emergence of goons to infiltrate demonstrations is a KK phenomenon.
What would you say, listening to the youth who are protesting against this regime and calling for adherence to the Constitution, what does listening to the youth mean to you in very practical terms? What would that look like?
These are people who are educated and informed. These are patriotic people. They're not rooting for any individual. They're just saying, restore our country to the rule of law. Make the country work for the majority, not for a privileged few. Stop oppressing us in the name of leading us. So what the Gen Z are saying is purely rooted in the Constitution, in our foundational values, in Article 10, and in the preamble to the Constitution, which clearly indicates that the state must work for the people of Kenya, not for a few individuals. And I'll repeat and say, leadership is not a title deed. Yes, you were elected for 5 years, but as an employee, your mandate can be shortened. Even in your own enterprises or domestic front, you sack employees anytime. Kenyans have sacked you. Listen to them carefully. The Gen Z want change. They want a country that works for them.
What does change look like, Martha?
Not a country that kills, abducts, and condemns them to abject poverty, and then harasses them with unjustifiable taxes while wasting their money.
What would change look like? Because you say there need to be indications that they are being heard. In your view, what would that change look like? What would Kenya look like today? Beyond, of course, what is important in terms of following the Constitution, but what would you need to see? What would need to have happened for us to say change has been effected?
A reset button where the entire system is overhauled, where there is enforcement of the law, where leadership is only accessible to those who qualify under Chapter 6.
Do any of the leaders we have, Martha, do any of the leaders we have now in the executive and parliament meet, Chapter 6 or, pass muster with the threshold?
I think the executive has already been recalled by the people, even parliament, but I know in parliament there are few leaders who have been true to the people, both in the National Assembly and in the Senate. I do not want to talk about cabinet because there is collective responsibility. And once it was dismissed, even the person who formed it condemned it, because you cannot be dismissed for doing good. But I am saying that our constitution gives guidelines, and Kenyans, the voters also, must heed to the constitution and only accept leaders who pass Chapter 6 and who have the demonstrated record that they can work for them.
Okay.
Kenya changing means our taxes working for us. It means taxation should never be a punishment. People should not be taxed beyond what they can bear. And the basic services envisaged in Article 43, food, education, health, and other services should be accessible to the people, should be the priority of any regime.
Okay.
That's what a new Kenya would look like.
All right. One last question before we go into viewer feedback. So, you know, the Finance Act 2023 has been nullified by the Court of Appeal. We wait to see its fate at the Supreme Court, where, you know, an appeal has been lodged. The Finance Act 2024 was rejected, of course, following protests from the people of Kenya. That leaves the government with about ₹500 billion of a gap in financing. How would you propose a government and an administration delivering and implementing on its agenda? Because there's, you know, huge cutbacks, of course, that are going to be experienced in some key development sectors. Martha, what would you do in circumstances such as these?
It's simple. Non-priority spending, stop it. And that's why Dr. Ruto ought to have kept his word to do away with the offices of first, second, and third lady, would have cut down on his advisors or removed them altogether, and many, many other areas. I want to say this, that the last report of the Auditor and Controller General, the good lady Nancy Kadongo, clearly shows that 1 trillion, not 1 million, was lost in either corruption, outright theft, or wasteful spending. So the $500 million you say KK regime will miss because of the nullification of the Finance Act 2023 and of the rejection of the 2024 is nothing. Prudent spending. You have all the money you need without increasing taxes.
Okay.
Oppressing people should never be your first option. Prudent spending. And economics is just akin to common sense. What do you do when you have less funds on your hands? You prioritize what really matters. You cannot go spending on luxury in your home when your children have no food or fees for education. This government, the KK regime, is operating contrary to common sense, if I may say that with respect to it.
Thank you for that. Let's get to viewer feedback now. This one is from Gadaronjo 1, I believe. That's the one I want us to get to in a moment, because she's already answered this one. So, Martha, this question says that you had agreed to deputize Raila Odinga. Politics seems to be all about personal interests. Ask Karua, had she been proposed at the table for a slot, would she have turned it down?
Of course, I wouldn't work for William Ruto. Whatever changes and whatever quality of people he gets, he's the minister for everything. He will not let anybody work. I have experience of working with these people in Parliament. I know at least Raila is easy to work with. You can differ, but you can sit across the table and discuss it. There is no way I would accept to work for William Ruto.
All right,
And they didn't ask me. Let me not pose like I was asked. They also know my position.
Okay, I want to take another one from Frosty King 1. I think you've already answered your take on the Nane Nane protests. But here's the question. Will we see you on the streets as a sign of perhaps support of the protests?
That is what now I would call a personal choice. I have a personal choice. I need not announce what I will do, but I'm fully supportive. You may or may not see me.
Okay. What sort of support are you giving?
Moral support is more than enough. Even this statement itself is support. My Twitter handle, moral support, not financial support. I know KK is looking for financiers. There's nothing to finance, and I'm not a financier.
Here's another question. Is there a risk that we're encouraging the creation of criminal gangs that could become a new menace? This is based off of what you were saying earlier. As a former Cabinet Secretary or Minister for Justice and Constitutional Affairs, what's your advice to the Kenya Police?
I would ask them to follow their oath of office, and yes, encouraging criminal gangs will come back to haunt all of us, including those who have sent them. I have seen occasions of leaders who support criminal gangs later being beaten by or assaulted by gangs sent by the people they worked with before. I would not myself advocate attacks through use of criminal gangs, even on my worst opponent. As Kenyans, let us be responsible, let us be each other's keeper, let us differ with respect, and let us let everybody advocate for their position without resorting to physical violence.
All right, my final question to you, Martha. Talking about the youth and listening to them and effecting change, what does that look like for NARC Kenya as a party? And what role do you see the party playing going forward? I know you talked about having a voice, in the political space we're in now, even if you may not have numbers in the House. But what is NARC Kenya's strategic position, and what does the strategy look like going forward in the country's political democratic dispensation?
NARC Kenya is in the process of rebranding and spreading its wings through aggressive recruitment throughout the country. I want to remind viewers that even the political party in power now was only formed the other day just before the elections. So the fact that we have no members of parliament is not a deterrent to us being the next party in power through the ballot. We are ready for the task. We are up to it. Watch the space.
Thank you, Martha Karua, NARC Kenya party leader, for joining us on The Explainer tonight. We thank you for your time and your insights on the program. Frustrations with the management of the SACCO and its consistent failure to address technical hitches which have continuously affected service delivery. Affected police officers say they cannot access their funds through the online platforms, and that this has greatly affected those who receive their salaries through the police SACCO accounts. Franklin Wala spoke to affected servicemen.
Records show 74,000 police officers are members of the police SACCO in addition to thousands of civilian members. A growing problem has members on edge. Every month, when police officers are paid, the SACCO's online and digital systems develop technical hitches leading to huge system failure. Officers who receive their salaries through the SACCO's bank accounts are mostly affected.
Tuko na app ambayo inaitwa Mtawi, imekuwa na shida. Alafu kuna *653# ambayo unapata kwamba wakati mshahara imelipwa unajaribu withdraw pesa, hakuna pesa inatoka.
So the mobile app had issues, is down. USSD is working, but it was slow, but currently it's working. So the challenges was just on that mobile app, which we are going to sort it. It is being optimized and it will be up and running.
To date, a good number of officers are unable to access their July salaries because of the technical hitch. Victims say this is a perennial issue which has not been addressed.
Kuna pesa milioni ambazo zimetengwa kwa technicians na wale ambao wanafanya kwa ofisi ma ICT, lakini unapata kwamba kuna ujanja na ukora na utapeli ambao unafanyika katika SACCO yetu ya Police SACCO, ambapo watu members hawezi pata pesa, haujui pesa imeenda wapi, haujui hata mshahara umelipa pesa ngapi kwa sababu uwezi access mshahara wako.
The app is down as I am talking now, but the USSD is working. So far, since salaries were paid, on ATM they have withdrawn 66 million. So the issue here is the technology. It's not about the funds being not available.
Officers spoke of members who withdrew excess funds from their accounts when the systems went down 2 months ago. The serving chairman has disputed claims that all this is as a result of his negligence and that of the SACCO's leadership. Members asking how 132 million shillings was used for purchase of new computers and 145 million for ICT development was used, as the ICT sector has continuously been affected.
Aeleze ya kwamba hii pesa ambayo imekuwa ikiibiwa members wa police SACCO imekuwa ikienda wapi, na akaweza kurejesha pesa ya members kwa sababu watu wameumia tangu mwaka jana.
There's a scenario where members with the true money, but the money did not hit their M-Pesa account. There's a team also in the office working on that to make sure that they reverse the money back to the account so that the member can still withdraw that money or push that money to the member's account.
Of the 74,000 police officers who are members of the SACCO, around 38,000 officers have been able to access their funds from the SACCO's accounts. The rest are waiting to see if the system hitch will be addressed. Franklin Wala, Citizen TV.
The family of Janet Kweyu, one of the 4 victims who perished in last Saturday's inferno at Toy Market in Kibra, is demanding justice following the unfortunate event that also claimed the life of the brother-in-law. Kweyu's father, Josephat Ingura, says he was unable to come to the rescue of the 20-year-old who just finished high school when she rushed to rescue properties at her stall and her sister's stalls.
Still in a state of shock, the family of the late Janet Kweyu are mourning the loss of their loved one in a fierce fire that consumed Toy Market, leaving behind 4 people dead and hundreds others, counting losses running into millions. Josephat Ingura remembers clearly the events of that fateful morning when Kweyu's mission to rescue clothes from her stall and her sister's stall ended up in tears after she was trapped in the flames.
Nikampigia msichana simu, uko wapi? Akasema tuko hapa baba, usizunguke basi hapo Toi, uje tukupatie hizi vitu. Nikamwambia huku nimeshindwa kupita, mimi nilizunguka. Kufika kwa shule ni mwisho ya shule kabisa, ni fence na shule. Nikajaribu kupiga simu nikapata ni mteja. Kajaribu tena nikapata ni mteja.
It was a double tragedy for the family. Kweyu perished in the fire with her brother-in-law Kevin Ochieng, who had also rushed to rescue properties from his wife's 3 shops.
Jen alikuwa mtoto mzuri sana na alikuwa mtoto mpendwa wangu msichana. Ambaye tulikuwa tunamtegemea kwa siku zijazo. Alikuwa amemaliza, alisoma huko Juja. Sasa tulikuwa natarajia tu afanye hii kazi yake, juu akali yake hii tukiongeza na yangu aende college.
Her charred body was taken to Nairobi Funeral Home, where it is lying ahead of a DNA sample process on Wednesday before it is released to the family for burial.
It is very painful. Wewe kusomesha mtoto kuanzia class 1 mpaka class 8, from class 8 mpaka form 4. You have not harvested anything. Leo hii wewe ndio tena unafanya mchango ya kutenda kufanya nini? Kusika tena mtoto.
We come from Busia County, Aterite in particular. It's very far. Like hatujui hata pa kuanzia. Hatujui kama ni funeral expense, hatujui kama ni kumon.
The family has also called on the government to resolve issues concerning cases of fires at the market, which has left families mourning and counting losses for over 10 years now.
Kisa si ya mara ya kwanza. Tunataka tujue kama wakazi wa Kibra, hapo Toi ni pahali pa mtu ama Toi ni ya government. Kama ni ya government, tunataka government afanye kazi, ajenge hizo majumba vizuri. ili kila mtu akuwa anajua hii ndio story yake.
An identification process for the 4 bodies is set to take place on Wednesday. Family members are expected to give DNA samples for identification of the 2 bodies burnt beyond recognition.
Grow your biashara and unlock your horizons with our payments and collections, vehicle and asset financing, unsecured bid bonds, LPO financing, insurance, cross-border solutions, and so much more. Stanbic Bank is regulated by the Central Bank of Kenya.
The private sector experienced a significant downturn in July as widespread protests and political instability wreaked havoc on business operations. The latest Purchasing Managers Index report from Stanbic Bank reveals a sharp decline in business conditions, with the PMI dropping to the lowest level since April 2021. Here's Jasmine Wamboi with the details.
Stanbic Bank's latest Purchasing Managers Index indicates that the country's business community took a significant hit in July. The PMI fell sharply to 43.1 in July from 47.2 in June. This marking the steepest decline since April 2021 and signaling a severe deterioration in business conditions. The ongoing protests and political instability have disrupted access to numerous businesses, leading to forced closures and deterred customer orders, severely impacting overall business activity. Supply chains were also heavily affected, with these disruptions causing longer delivery times for the first time in 10 months. Backlogs of work accumulated to the highest level since March 2023, telling the extent of operational challenges. Inflationary pressures added to the woes, with input costs rising for the second consecutive month due to high living costs and increased taxation. The agriculture sector saw the sharpest decline, while manufacturing was the only sector to report increased output. Employment levels rose for the 7th consecutive month, albeit at a slower pace. However, business confidence about future activity has weakened, dropping to levels last seen in February. The data collected from the 11th of July to the 29th underscores the need for political stability to restore business confidence and support economic recovery. Jasmine Wamboi, Citizen TV.
A ruling by the Court of Appeal nullifying the Finance Act of 2023 has thrown the country into limbo, with different sector players unsure of their next move. The silence from both the National Treasury and the taxman only worsening their uncertainty. Players in the electric mobility sector are now warning that should the nullification stand, the sector could see a significant reduction in uptake of electric vehicles owing to high prices occasioned by the revocation of the tax breaks that were provided for in the Finance Act of 2023. Jimmy Mbogo now takes a look at the ramifications of the ruling to the EV sector.
The contentious finance bill of 2023 had several provisions which were welcomed by players in the e-mobility space. This was to zero rate value-added tax and excise duty on some key products. In the act, the government moved to exempt VAT on electric motorcycles, electric bicycle, electric buses, as well as batteries used for electric vehicles. These exemptions, according to the Electric Mobility Association of Kenya, EMAC, were a major boost to the sector, attracting both investment and appetite from consumers. Upon the implementation of the bill, the sector saw the numbers soar 500%, with buses increasing from 3 to more than 21. As electric motorcycles jumped in number from 739 to 2,557. Electric cars also increased nearly 5-folds from 300 to 1,300 within a year of the exemptions. However, the recent Court of Appeal ruling nullifying the act could undo all this growth in the sector, an issue that EMAC says needs to be addressed urgently.
The impact will end up reducing the uptake specifically to customers, because an example is a bicycle which costs 98,000. We have to increase potentially about by 20%. That will go to about 120,000.
So currently a bus like the one behind me is 8 million shillings if you're purchasing it, and that will move it to 9.2 million shillings. If you then compare with a diesel bus, that means you're 3 million shillings more expensive on an electric bus on just purchase price.
IMAC members are also expressing concerns occasioned by the uncertainty created by the ruling, noting that it could wipe away the sector's effort to create investor confidence in the country. Some players indicating that they have been forced to realign their investment priorities, while others were forced to push further their debt repayment to reserve capital for business continuity should the nullification stand.
Taking away those incentives discourages or takes away the appetite that most of these investors would have to want to come and invest here.
Recently, we just closed a fundraising of around 14 million US dollars to help us in scaling up in terms of our production. But now with this, the investors that actually gave us money will not be able to be confident to give us money anymore.
In its projection, IMAC says it was hopeful that the sector would create close to 700,000 jobs in the next 5 years, with at least 300,000 jobs being created by 2028. Boda riders who have moved to electric motorcycles are also pleading with the government to ensure that the incentives remain in place.
Nao tutakuwa na shida kwa sababu swap price itaongezwa ambayo yenye iko kwa sasa at least na tuachie kitu kidogo chenye tunaenda nacho nyumbani. So kama ita change, which means swap price itaenda juu, bei ya pikipiki itaenda juu.
As this electric vehicle gets recharged here, this is exactly what stakeholders within the e-mobility space hope that the policymakers will do to the sector to attract investors and ensure that the sector, which was fast gaining popularity, does not die off. Jimmy Mbogo, Citizen TV, Nairobi.
Drama ensued at Kibirigwi Coffee Farmers Cooperative in Ndia, Kirinyaga County, as farmers ejected the society's leadership, accusing them of poor leadership and corruption during their tenure. Hundreds of coffee farmers from Kibirigwi who attended a special general meeting resolved to disband the management and call for fresh elections at factory level in the next 3 weeks. The farmers who questioned the motive by Kibirigwi factory leadership in changing their suppliers without their consent called for immediate investigations as well as a lifestyle audit of the management. The heated meeting forced Kirinyaga County Assembly CEC, who's in charge of trade, Calbert Njeru, who was in attendance, to officially disband the leadership. Fresh elections will be held on the 22nd of August.
We demand to know where, why, and under whose authority our coffee was removed from Kirinyaga Slopes Brokerage Company to Alliance Buildings without our authority.
Members said chairman is full of himself. They cited that he doesn't allow members contributions in meetings and even hire goons to throw out members who seem to have different views or opinions.
Kulingana na sheria nitatangaza mambo yafuatayo. Ya kwamba kutakuwa na kutafuta fresh mandate ya all board members.
Tech giant Microsoft is now advocating for the adoption of AI by small businesses in the pharmaceutical space. Dennis Otieno has the details of this and other stories in our Business News Roundup.
Microsoft officials in the country reckon AI holds the key to transforming operations and prospects of small pharmacies in Kenya. Speaking during a partnership with Kenyan startup Zendawa, Microsoft Africa Transformation Office General Manager Gerald Maitha says the technology is crucial in creating online access to pharmaceutical offerings as well as financing solutions for small businesses and pharmacy shops. Elsewhere, the rising unemployment rate in the United States is likely to have significant ripple effects in Kenya. This is according to an analysis by HFM Market, which shows the US Federal Reserve is likely to cut interest rates in September to stimulate job creation, which could lead to a depreciation of the US dollar.
With the right skill, the right knowledge, and with the right risk appetite, we have been seeing an interest develop whereby people want to see whether they can be able to access opportunities in offshore financial markets, and it doesn't matter the size of their portfolio as long as they can be able to capture these opportunities.
Finally, the Kenya Veterinary Board has heightened the crackdown on practitioners engaged in malpractice. Speaking during a raid in Nairobi, the board's enforcement manager Benson Kibore says some of the illegalities noted include misuse of veterinary drugs as sedatives and operating without a valid license.
Ours is to protect the animal welfare, the animal health, and the public, because you understand that drugs that are used by people who are not practitioners, but drugs, very sensitive drugs that are accessed by farmers, end up being passed to the population through meat, through milk.
Dennis Otieno, Citizen TV.